Hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. In the next half hour, we'll see what's making headlines with the journalist and author Christina Patterson and the former speechwriter at Number 10, Asa Bennett. So let's take a look at some of those front pages right now. We'll start with the front page of the Sunday Times, which leads with findings of a cross-parliamentary report that the BBC chairman, Richard Sharp, wasn't sufficiently transparent about his personal dealings with former Prime Minister Boris Johnson in the lead-up to Sharp's appointment at the BBC, allegations that Mr Sharp denies. The Sunday Express has spoken to the brother of Jamie Bulger, who insists that one of Jamie's killers, James Venables, must never be released from prison. The Sunday Mirror has an interview with the former partner of the broadcaster Vanessa Feltz, while the Sunday People reports that some GP surgeries are being forced to close early because they can't afford their heating bills. And according to the Daily Star, nudists are putting their clothes on for this very same reason. Now, just to remind you that by scanning the QR code that you see on your screen during the programme, you can check the front pages of the papers while you watch along with us. Now, tonight we're joined by Christina Patterson and Asa Bennett. Good evening to you both, Christina and Asa. Lovely to have you with us on this Saturday evening. Let's begin, if we can, with the Sunday Times, Christina. And this is the reporting that's coming from the Digital Culture, Media and Sport Committee, that the BBC chairman may have undermined trust in the BBC by not being entirely forthcoming with everything that was going on when he was talking to Boris Johnson and Sam Blythe about that £800,000 credit facility.
Yes, well, it's a pretty damning report. It claims that he fell well short of the standards that would generally be expected and that he has undermined confidence in the whole public appointment system. And I have to say that that is certainly, I think both of those things are accurate. I think the whole thing has undermined confidence in the public appointment system, although I think confidence in the public appointment system in recent years, particularly under Boris Johnson, had dropped radically anyway, because there was this sense that so many of the appointments were basically given to cronies and people who had voted for Brexit. They were given, it seems, quite often more on people's political allegiances than necessarily on their skills and experience and talent for the job. And Richard Sharp has issued a kind of standard non-apology in which he says something like, I'm sorry if the committee felt that I didn't reach, offer the degree of transparency that they would have liked. And, when people are basically not sorry, they say that they're sorry the other person was offended or took it, was mad enough to think they had done something wrong when in fact they hadn't done something wrong. So I don't think that will placate anyone. And the Lucy Powell, the Shadow Culture Secretary, has said he should consider his opinion. I suspect he will brazen this one out and I suspect he will stay. But I think it not only has undermined faith in the public appointment system, but also has caused a lot of disquiet and distress at the BBC.
Thank you for that, Christina. And Asa, what do you think? A non-apology from Sharp, as Christina says, and the reporting in this article as well just lays out to remind us that this is the first sort of look at this situation. There are two other reports into Mr Sharp that are ongoing.
I think the Culture Committee clearly are feeling a bit sore after when they first interviewed Mr Sharp, saying basically that he was an excellent appointment, and this included Labour members, and it was a unanimous verdict, if you like. And so now this has turned sharply, and that's a very accidental pun, apologies, I move on, because they've realised that, they asked him openly, was there anything they needed to know about these things? And in ideal moments, you may argue, to volunteer such matters. Clearly, answer came there, none. But now we find from the Sunday Times' reporting, which is very much led on this, that, and he belatedly acknowledged that, he's apologised for not being so forthcoming. But as a result, what we see is that, the MP say there were lapses of judgment. They've stopped short of calling him to resign over any sort of pretense or appearance of being too close and compromising any sense of neutrality that the BBC chairman needs to help maintain. But they've certainly, let's put it this way, they're not calling for him to fall on the sword, but they definitely putting the sword out in front of him and seeing what he'll do.
Okay, let's move on to another story that's making news tomorrow. We've been covering it today, Christina, and this is in the Sunday Express. This is the situation that happened a couple of nights ago, or rather last night, actually, in Merseyside, and violence outside hotel housing asylum seekers.
Yes, it sounds like a rather volatile situation. There are protesters and violence outside a hostel in Knowsley in Merseyside following an alleged incident of some kind of sexual nature. It's not clear exactly what happened, but it seems that someone who may or may not be an asylum seeker, but who's being put up in this accommodation, behaved inappropriately to a teenager, and that has stoked up an enormous amount of anger on social media and actually on the streets now in relation to violence. And even Suella Braverman, who is not known for wanting to discourage criticism of asylum seekers and, as she would call them, illegal immigrants, even she has said, look, it's time to calm things down. What this brings to mind to me is a number of incidents in Germany and in Scandinavia where there were a number of sexual assaults by asylum seekers, often from the Middle East, and that caused enormous amounts of unease and anger, because sometimes for political reasons those assaults were not publicized in the press. Certainly in Sweden that happened rather shockingly. So that nobody is saying that there is a mass problem with asylum seekers. This looks like one incident and we don't even know if it actually happened. But what it does show is how much resentment there is in certain communities about so-called illegal immigration, and how easily that can tip over into something really quite ugly.
Yeah, we've got, as Christina says, we've got no idea, Asa, about what actually brought those people out, the truth of what actually brought those people out. But we have seen the aftermath of those people being outside that hotel. It just, as Christina was saying there, really, it lays out sort of the difficulties of dealing with the issue and also the dangers of rumours running rampant on social media.
Absolutely, and we've seen what happens when this spreads completely out of control. The reports show that a police van was set alight, missiles were thrown. No one seems to have been injured, thankfully, but then clearly arrests were made as protesters were clashing. We're talking about not just the far right, but also then pro-refugee activists, and they've been saying that talking about how sort of terrifying it was, and that's where the war zone quote comes from. I think I was very struck by a quote from the local MP who basically made clear that the people were warned and reminded us that the facts are very few at the moment. It's not clear why this is happening, but one thing is clear is that these protesters, the far right in particular, do not represent the community.
OK, Asa, Christina, just pause for me a second there, because I don't want to bring our viewers some breaking news out of the Brits, where it's been announced that Harry Styles has won this year's Album of the Year. It adds to 3 other awards that he took home this evening, including Song of the Year and Artist of the Year. We'll have all the latest on those Brit awards from our arts and entertainment correspondent in the next hour. So Harry Styles there, winning Album of the Year at this year's Brits. All right, in a moment I'm going to ask you both for your favourite Harry Styles song, but let's move on with the paper review. Christina, let's go on to something inside the Sunday Express here, and this is all about the Sussexes apparently lining up new big money contracts. Tell us about this.
Well, I mean, they've got 16 bathrooms to clean in the mansion they're living in, and I imagine that's quite expensive. So they had, I think it was something like 60, let me check, it was something like $82.7 million deal with Netflix and more with Spotify and various contracts lined up. And of course, Harry's book Spare was one of the biggest fastest selling non-fiction books of all time, and the Netflix series did very well. So clearly dishing the dirt on their family, and particularly in Harry's case, on his brother and father, has proved very lucrative for him. And the hope is that it will continue to prove lucrative. And apparently there are going to be all kinds of possibly record-breaking offers for him to be a pundit on the day of the coronation in America and to do all kinds of presenting and speaking. So, I just hope that all this money makes him happy, because so far he seems to be one of the unhappiest, extremely rich people in the world. And it's a real shame to see someone who is so in love with his wife and who has clearly two lovely children, living in a beautiful place in a sunny country with apparently friends around them, be so miserable. I absolutely feel for the pain he went through in relation to his mother and the paparazzi, but I really think enough of this misery, and I just hope that whatever he does next focuses on something more positive.
All right, we're going to leave it there. We've run out of time, but I can see you nodding along with some of that, Asa, so appreciate that, Christina. Thank you for telling us about that story, about the Sussexes and another contract to earn a bit more money in the Express. Now, still to come, how high heating bills are affecting many people all across the country. We'll discuss how they're coping or not when we get back. Hello there and welcome back. You're watching the press preview. Joining us are Christina Patterson and Asa Bennett, and there they are in the big screen. Christina, Asa, good to have you both with us. Thanks for sticking around. All right, let's go to the front page of the Sunday People now, and they've got a story there about the cost of living crisis, Christina, and how this is really the effect on NHS and GP surgeries particularly. Apparently, some can't afford to keep the heating on.
Yes, well, according to this story, some GP surgeries are limiting their opening hours because they can't afford, as you just said, to heat their surgeries. That will be very bad news for a lot of patients, because I think many people struggle to see a GP anyway. Often there's a kind of mad rush to have to call at 8 o'clock in the morning, and then you can't get through, and then you have to wait several weeks. I have to say that is not. I'm very lucky in that my GP surgery is very good, and I've been seeing the same GP largely for about 20 years, which is probably quite unusual, and that's in a very, very busy GP surgery in Hackney. But the cost of living crisis is causing problems for everyone, and if it's affecting people's ability to see a GP, it will affect their health, and that will have a spiralling effect to the already many, many problems we're facing in this country. So very far from ideal.
Absolutely right. And I say it kind of brings to mind as well the sort of the recent stories we've had about GPs, particularly, calls to work longer hours from parts of the media. Also, ideas about changing the way that GP practices operate. It's just the increased pressure that we're seeing on general practitioners.
Absolutely, and we've seen in the health service recently, all sorts of professionals going out on strike in order to try and improve their pay conditions. And so I think it's this sort of perfect storm that they're facing at the moment of, cost of living going through the roof, energy prices being at, recently at record highs, although we expect and hope they will certainly start to ease as we get into the summer. So clearly the government that's why the government's made clear it's one of their big priorities to try and, bear down on the backlog and, no doubt get help hit so that people can start to see their GPs start to get the appointments they need.
And there is also, of course, I think last time you and I spoke, Christina, there was the course pay to see a GP. Do you think we're likely to start seeing more calls to try and change the way that people get access to their nearest doctor?
I think that's a tricky one to answer, actually, because I think it is so enshrined into the DNA of this country that the NHS is always free at the point of delivery to everyone. And I think studies have been done into the possible consequences of charging people for GPs visits, and what the conclusion has been that the poorest, whose health is generally the worst for all kinds of reasons, then end up not seeing doctors at all, and obviously they suffer much worse health, and then the the bill that the country ends up paying is much higher. So it is a very complicated issue. I mean, I'm all in favour of, the NHS. I think it certainly has been one of the glories of this country, but it isn't working very well at the moment. And I think we have to do some things differently. And interestingly, I think Wes Streeting, the Shadow Health Secretary, has some very interesting and quite bold ideas about what to do about the NHS and GP surgeries, and in a way that perhaps the Conservatives don't dare talk about, because they can't be seen to be privatising the NHS because of this sense that the NHS is a national religion. So I think we'll have to see what happens. But clearly there are a lot of people who are struggling to see a GP at the moment. Lots of people struggling to see anyone at the moment in healthcare terms, and that is very worrying when health standards of health in this country are dropping radically anyway.
Yeah, and Asa, there are some calls from GPs themselves who perhaps want to try and change the fact that they have to sort of manage the entire practice and other local surgeries as well.
And as well as this, there's obviously the calls that bubble up about charging people for missing appointments. I think even Rishi Sunak suggested that last year as a way to try and make sure that what is expected of GPs is then a more efficient and appropriate load. I think the chief problem health associations have made clear is that it's administratively fiendish to try and implement as a scheme. There's also discussions about whether GPs then should be paid by how many patients they see, or in other or how many patients are on their books. So I'm sure this debate will rumble on.